I have to ask you a question that somebody on our amazing team wanted to ask. He's happily married. Another, like you mentioned, incredible relationship.
Are they good friends?
They're amazing friends.
There you go.
But I'm not saying who it is, so I can say some stuff, which is it started out as a great sexual connection.
Oh, well, there you go.
But then became very close friends after that.
Listen.
There you go. So speaking of sex,
many paths to Rome.
he has a wonderful son, and he's wanting to have a second kid, and he wanted to ask the great Andrew Huberman, is there like sexual positions or any kind of thing that can help maximize the chance that they have a girl versus a boy? Because they had a wonderful boy, they want a girl. Is there a way to control the gender?
Well, this has been debated for a long time, and I did a 4.5-hour episode on fertility. And the reason I did a 4.5-hour episode on fertility is that, first of all, I find that reproductive biology to be fascinating, and I wanted a resource for people that were thinking about or struggling with having kids for whatever reason. And it felt important to me to combine the male and female components in the same episode. It's all timestamped, so you don't have to listen to the whole thing. We talk about IVF, in vitro fertilization. We talk about natural pregnancy. Okay, the data on position is very interesting. Mm-hmm. But let me just say a few things. There are a few clinics now, in particular some out of the United States, that are spinning down sperm and finding that they can separate out fractions, as they're called. They can spin the sperm down at a given speed, and they'll separate out at different sort of depths within the test tube that allow them to pull out the sperm on top or below and bias the probability towards male or female births. It's not perfect. It's not 100%. It's a very costly procedure. It's still very controversial. Now, with in vitro fertilization, you can extract eggs. You can introduce a sperm directly by pipette. It's a process called ICSI, or you can set up a sperm race in a dish. And if you get a number of different embryos, meaning the eggs get fertilized to duplicate and start to form a blastocyst, which is a ball of cells, early embryo, then you can do karyotyping. So you can look for XX or XY, select the XY, which then would give rise to a male offspring, and implant that one. So there is that kind of sex selection. With respect to position, there's a lot of lore that, if the woman is on top or the woman's on the bottom, or whether or not the penetration is from behind, whether or not it's going to be male or female offspring. And frankly, the data are not great, as you can imagine, because those would be interesting studies to run, perhaps.
But there is studies, there is paper.
There are some,
but they're not, I guess. Yeah, there's more lore than science.
And there are a lot of other variables that are hard to control. Yeah. So, for instance, if it's ejaculation during intromission, during sex, penetration, et cetera, then you can't measure, for instance, sperm volume, as opposed to when it's IVF, and they can actually measure how many milliliters, how many forward motile sperm. It's hard to control for certain things. And it just can vary between individuals and even from one ejaculation to the next. And okay, so there's too many variables. However, the position thing is interesting in the following way. And then I'll answer whether or not you can bias towards a female. Okay. As long as we're talking about
I have other questions about sex.
But as long as we're talking about sexual position,
all right.
There are data that support the idea that in order to increase the probability of successful fertilization, that indeed the woman should not stand upright after sex, and should right after the man has ejaculated inside her, and should adjust her pelvis, say 15 degrees upwards. I mean, some of the fertility experts, MDs, will say that's crazy, but others that I sought out, and not specifically for this answer, but for researching that episode, said that, what you're talking about is trying to get the maximum number of sperm, and it's contained in semen, and yes, the semen can leak out. And so keeping the pelvis tilted at 15 degrees for about 15 minutes, obviously tilted in the direction that would have things running upstream, not downstream, so to speak.
Gravity.
Gravity, it's real. So for maximizing fertilization, the doctors I spoke to just said, look, given that if people are trying to get pregnant, what is spending 15 minutes on their back This sort of thing. Okay, so then with respect to female getting a female offspring or XX female offspring selectively, there is the idea that as fathers get older, they're more likely to have daughters as opposed to sons. That's from the papers I've read, is a significant but still mildly significant result. So with each passing year, this person increases the probability they're going to have a daughter, not a son. Look, so that's interesting.
But the probability differences are probably tiny.
I mean, it's not, it's a significant. It's not trivial.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a trivial difference. But if they want to ensure having a daughter, then they should do IVF and select an XX embryo. And when you go through IVF, they genetically screen them for karyotype, which is XXXY. And they look at mutations, genotypic mutations for things like, trisomies and aneuploidies, all the stuff you don't want.
But there is a lot of lore if you look on the internet.
Sure, different foods.
So there are a lot of variables.
There's a lot of variables, but there haven't been systematic studies. So I think probably the best thing to do, unless they're going to do IVF, is just roll the dice. And I think with each passing year, they increase the probability of getting a female offspring. But of course, with each passing year, the egg and sperm quality degrade. Mm-hmm. So get after it soon.